All About Dinosaurs by Chapman Andrews. Illustrated by Thomas W. Voter. Narrated by Anita Saran. Chapter 10. Flying Dragons and Sea Serpents. Although dinosaurs were lords of the land, flying reptiles ruled the air. Thousands upon thousands swarmed through the sky in the Mesozoic period. They are called pterodactyls, which means wing finger. Some were very big and some were hardly larger than a sparrow. There were pterodactyls with long tails, pterodactyls with short tails, and pterodactyls with no tails at all. Some flew by day, others flew at night. At least we think they did, because of their wild, owl-like eyes. None of them had feathers. Instead, their skins were naked and quite smooth. The smaller ones probably lived on insects, catching them in the air like bats. The big ones of the Cretaceous period scooped up fish in their long beaks. In all the pterodactyls, each wing was formed by a sheet of skin stretched on the long little finger back to the hind leg. That isn't a very good wing, for the reptile couldn't fly if the skin were torn. The bat's wing is supported by 4 fingers, which spread the wing skin apart and strengthen it. In birds, of course, the finger bones are bound closely together to hold the feathers of the wing. The pterodactyls probably sailed and glided more than actually flapping their wings. Pteranodon of the Cretaceous period was the biggest of all the flying reptiles. He was a fantastic goblin-like creature. I always think of him as a witch on a broomstick that sailed through the sky. He had a long beak with no teeth and a great triangular cap or crest. It looked something like a fish's fin. Possibly it acted as a rudder to steer the reptile as it soared through the air. Although the wings were more than 20 feet long, the body was very small. Probably Pteranodon did not weigh as much as a large turkey. The bones were hollow like those of a bird, so they must have been light. Actually, the bones were no thicker than a postcard. Therefore, they were smashed flat in most fossil skeletons and are difficult to put together. The remains of Pteranodon have been found mostly in the fine sediment of the chalk beds of western Kansas. These were formed far out in the great inland sea that then occupied the state of Kansas. The chalk beds are more than 100 miles from what was the nearest shoreline at the time. So, Pteranodon must have gone out at least 100 miles of the water. People who make airplanes have studied the way this great flying reptile was built. The mechanics of his wings are not good. Birds and bats have much better wings for true flight. Pteranodon couldn't do a power dive because the wings could not be folded backward. It would be impossible to change speed quickly. But Pteranodon must have been a very fine glider. He could soar majestically through the sky, up and down, back and forth. All he had to do was to take advantage of the air currents rising from the warm tropical land or water below him. When feeding, he probably glided along just above the water and darted his long bill into the waves to pick up a fish that was near the surface. How remains of Pteranodon happened to be preserved is a real mystery. The body was so very light that it must have floated. After a while, the bones must have fallen apart. But almost complete skeletons have been found. A fine one is in the American Museum of Natural History. Another in the Yale University Museum shows the imprint of the wing membrane. It seems possible that when a pteranodon was gliding close to the surface, it might have been seized by a fish or a sea reptile. The hollow bones would be broken and filled with water. If the fish did not eat the pteranodon at once, the remains would sink to the bottom. There it might be buried in the soft mud. That is about the only explanation that has been presented. All the pterodactyls had large brains for reptiles. Their sight was very good and the sense of smell poor. This is like our present-day birds. The flying reptiles needed good eyes and big ones, for they were high up in the air and had to chase their prey by sight. How Pteranodon moved on land is not clear. He might rest upon the knuckle joints of the closed wings, but he couldn't walk on them. The wing joints were not able to move forward or back. If he stood on his hind legs, the wings must have been held uplifted. Probably this big glider didn't walk at all. There were 3 hooked claws on the wing joints. They could be used to hold on to trees and rocks. He could land on a cliff or high rock and hang there to rest. When he wanted to fly again, he simply pushed himself off into the air. We have no information and not even good guesses about their nests or their young. Sea serpents. While pterodactyls swept along the surface of Mesozoic seas, marine reptiles that were not dinosaurs swarmed in the water below them. Of course, some of the dinosaurs did go into the water. As you know, the thunder lizard and his cousin Diplodocus spent much of their time splashing about in the mud and shallows of lakes and rivers. The duck-billed dinosaurs were good swimmers, but they were really land animals. The reptiles I am writing about lived in the water all the time and never came out on land. The best known is the great Plesiosaur. He had a long snake-like neck, small head, jaws full of sharp teeth, a body like a turtle, and a good-sized tail. He fits perfectly the popular idea of a sea serpent. When vacations start in the summer, many city people go to the shore. Then sea serpent stories are sure to be published in the newspapers. The sea is a mysterious place. People like to believe that strange ancient creatures still exist in the unexplored ocean. Why can't it be true? Well, nothing is impossible in nature. But the modern sea serpent idea is improbable. So many ships travel across every ocean that even the greatest depths have been explored. If big unknown creatures like Plesiosaurs still lived, they would be seen by many people. Some would certainly die and their bodies would drift ashore. Dead sea serpents are often reported. I have followed up some of these stories myself. Always they prove to be basking sharks, whales, sea lions, or some other animal well known to scientists. One widespread sea serpent story was about the Loch Ness monster of Scotland. Many people saw what they thought was its long neck and part of its body above the surface of the water. Tracks of huge webbed feet were said to have been seen in the mud. A man actually photographed the monster. That did it. The picture was sent to the New York Times. They brought it to me at the American Museum of Natural History. The neck of the monster proved to be the high, slender back fin of a killer whale. So it is with most of the sea serpent stories. People see some strange creature. They have only a quick view of it and imagine the rest. At present, there is no reason to believe that any of the great marine reptiles of the age of reptiles still exist. So far as we know, they died out with the dinosaurs millions of years ago. There were many kinds of plesiosaurs. The seas of the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods were full of them. Some were big and some were small, but none was fish-like in form or habits. They lived more like turtles, but did not wear a shell. Probably the skin was smooth and naked. Their broad, flat bodies had strong paddles on either side, which were used like oars. The joints and muscle attachments showed that they could row backward as well as forward. When such a creature met a fish, his slender neck would shoot out like a striking snake. Once the fish was in his mouth, the long sharp teeth held it like a trap. Plesiosaurs lived entirely in the water. It is doubtful that they ever came out on land. Instead, they paddled placidly along near shore. There they would see the gigantic thunder lizards wading in the shallows, stuffing trailing water plants into their mouths. They could see small running dinosaurs skipping over the rocks and witness furious battles between big flesh eaters like Allosaurus. From the safety of the water, they had a good view of dinosaur life. What a movie it would have made! Terror in the sea. The inland sea of Kansas was a sad place for the smaller creatures that lived in its waters. Gigantic reptiles, mosasaurs, roamed the depths. In it swam the king of turtles, Archelon. He was a dozen feet or more in length, with a head a full yard long. In the shallows prowled huge fish with massive jaws and teeth like spikes. Over the water, pterodactyls sailed majestic, ready to snap up surface-feeding creatures. Truly, those were troublesome times for the small fry of the old Kansas Sea. Hundreds or even thousands of bones of mosasaurs have been taken from the chalk beds. The mosasaurs were really swimming lizards that grew to great size. Some were as long as 30 feet and distantly related to the living varanus lizards of Asia and Africa. The largest of the mosasaurs, Tylosaurus, was as big as a small whale. It probably weighed more than a duck-billed dinosaur. Tylosaurus was completely water-living and never came out on land. The long, flexible body, powerful tail, and paddle-shaped feet could push it through the water at great speed. The mouth was filled with terrifying rows of sharp-pointed teeth for holding slippery fish. That Tylosaurus gulped his food is shown by the bones of the lower jaw. Each jaw is hinged in the middle and can be bowed outward. This gives the creature a much larger mouth. Mosasaurs fit the idea of a sea serpent pretty well. Unfortunately, there is no reason to believe that they still exist. Their day was during the Cretaceous period, 70 million years ago. The inland seas were shallow, and after a while, the land began to lift up. The movement was very slow, perhaps only an inch or two in a century, but it continued to rise. Finally, hills and ridges in the sea bottom pushed up to the surface. They formed islands and sandbars. These kept getting bigger and cut the sea into lakes. After millions of years, these too disappeared. When they dried up, the reptiles caught in those inland seas died. But while they lived well. Ichthyosaurs. These reptiles were completely fish-like in form. The modern shark, the modern porpoise, and the ancient Ichthyosaur all were shaped alike. That was because they lived the same kind of life in the water, and they had to adapt themselves to it. From the outside, you might think all of them were fish, but underneath the skin, the body structure tells a story. The shark is shown to be a fish, the porpoise is a mammal, and the Ichthyosaur is unmistakably a reptile. It had the reptile's muscles and bone and brain, and the reptile's heart and lungs. None of the Ichthyosaurs got to be nearly as large as the mosasaur, Tylosaurs. Most of them were only 10 or 15 feet long. The body was streamlined for fast movement in the water. The head was sharp-pointed, the tail two-lobed, and the four legs were like fins. It also had a high back fin. This kept the animal from rolling from side to side as it swam. Sharp teeth for holding fish filled the mouth. The eyes were very large. Reptiles are egg-laying animals. Since the Ichthyosaurs were reptiles but never came out on land, how were the young born? Nature seems to have taken care of that. Instead of laying eggs in a nest as dinosaurs did, they kept them within their bodies. When the eggs hatched, the young appeared alive. In scientific language, they were oviviparous. Ovoviviparous. We are pretty sure this is true because of an Ichthyosaurus skeleton in the American Museum of Natural History. This came from Holzmaden, Germany, a little town near Stuttgart. The reptile lies in a slab of slate, 9 feet long and 2.5 feet wide. It is perfectly preserved, and in the body cavity are the skeletons of several young animals. The baby Ichthyosaurs are surprisingly large. The head of one is 9.5 inches long. That is half as large as the mother's head. The backbone and the paddles of the babies are well developed and show that they could swim as soon as born. So here is a wonderful adaptation for life in the water. It is evident that Ichthyosaurs were once land-living reptiles and laid their eggs in the sand as others do. At the time, they did not have bodies shaped like a fish, but for some unknown reason, they began to spend more and more time in the water. So they became fish-like in shape and had to change their way of having babies too, since they could not go out on land. Not only do we know how Ichthyosaurs gave birth to their young, but also how they looked in life. This is because another remarkable specimen was discovered in the slate quarries at Holzmaden, Germany. It shows the outline of the body, fins, paddles and tail as a black film in slate. This is one of the most remarkable fossils ever found. In this chapter, I have written about only a few of the reptiles that lived in the air and in the sea when dinosaurs ruled the land. There were others, but they were smaller and not so spectacular. Giant sharks and turtles and crocodiles were there too. But this book is only about the reptiles of the Mesozoic era.